6 o'clock. We have a quorum. The first thing on the agenda is the selection of a chairperson. And before we select the chairperson, I would just like to say, I think at this stage of all our committees, it sort of hurt us to select another person that have started out with the committee, because first of all, when you're chairing a committee, you have to have the time, the availability to put into what you need to put into that committee. And I'm not saying, I just think it's better hold us, like this is March, almost at the half of the school year is over, to select a different person. So at this time, I would put forward to select Kate as the chairperson of the policy committee, and I need a motion to that effect.
I make the motion that Kate become the chairperson of this committee.
And there other anyone else would like to chair this committee?
No, but I second it.
Okay, so we don't have anybody. Teresa seconded. Okay, thank you, Teresa. Okay, all those in favor, could I hear aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we move on and I turn it over to Kate.
Thank you very much, Gladys. And thank you everybody for the opportunity to chair this committee again. Before we get going on the agenda, is there a committee member who is available to take the minutes this evening, please? I do need somebody to do that before
I'll
we
do
can
it,
move.
Kate. I'll do it.
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. I appreciate
sorry,
that.
I'm off camera. You got it.
That's okay, no problem. So Michelle, if you need information about the first part of that meeting, I did take a couple notes real quick, so I'll be happy to relay those after the meeting, okay?
Okay.
All right. So Kelly, thank you again for pulling together the agenda for this evening's meeting. As we have been doing, we're going to continue with the 5,000 series. And we're going to start off with policy 5114, suspension, expulsion, and student due process.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so here is the model policy from CABE on suspension, expulsion, and due process. It is quite a lengthy policy that matches exactly with rules and regulations in current Connecticut state statute. So I will put it up for a moment, see if there's any questions about particular sections. And certainly if you want me to camera myself to walk you through it with an overview, we'd be happy to do that.
Make it a little larger.
Okay. Oh God. Okay.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Is that easier for people to say?
Yeah, I can see. I'm okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What are the changes?
The policy objectives, number 2, is that what they're calling, was it restorative practice? Is that the term?
So there are definitely, restorative practices is highlighted under the objectives under number 4. Really, number 2 is equity and fairness. So basically making sure that we're equitable, that we're consistent, that we're not displaying biases, in any of our disciplinary practices. So number 2 does not explicitly speak to that, but number 4 under the policy objectives does.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, Teresa, that's why we are here, to ask questions.
Um,
Kelly, I have a question. It's
Sure.
Juanita. So, under policy objectives, number 4, guidelines, number 3.
Mhm.
So by July, we have a mandate about restorative practices.
Mhm.
Is this where we are going to include that?
Yeah,
Or
so
is
this.
it somewhere else?
I'm sorry. No, I apologize. I thought you were done with the question. Did you want to say anything else, Juanita, before I respond?
So is there another policy, like school climate? Is there someplace else where restorative practices might be mentioned and a bit more detail on training? I know that this is the expulsion
Mhm.
and suspension part. So I'm looking to find out if it's somewhere else in policy also.
There definitely, as this new mandate is coming down, you will see the restorative practices terminology reflected in upcoming additional policies. So more particular to training, requirements around professional development and so forth. This one is just referencing it as one factor or consideration under disciplinary action. So that's why it's here, but you will also see it in upcoming policies in different places.
Thank you.
Teresa?
Does that mean we're going to get rid of expulsion hearings?
I think the intent of all of this is clearly communicating guidelines, making sure we're fair and equitable, making sure everyone knows what is expected, to try to intervene on the lowest level possible to prevent disciplinary actions. But this policy very clearly outlines that there are certain situations in which, despite all of these proactive approaches, that discipline is appropriate and warranted, including and up to expulsions. So the hope is, Teresa, that we will be decreasing the number and need in that area, but certainly there are legal requirements behind which an expulsion would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Oh, thanks. So are there changes from the prior version to this one? Are there any changes that we should be looking at or you can highlight?
Sure. I will say that the changes between these two policies is really bringing it up with current regulations and guidelines. So more explicit, the guidelines that are outlined here, including references to things like restorative practices, is new, or more explicit in this policy, I should say. In my opinion, I think the outline on clear expectations and communications to families, and then it does a little bit more detailed or explicit description of expulsions. And so those are the areas in particular, but the two policies, it's not really one you could do a match for match because there have been some substantial changes. I think the essence of the policy is very similar with our current practices, but this new update from CABE definitely is more explicit and in a variety of different areas to help people to better understand the rules and regulations.
Teresa?
So
Oh, sorry,
this is-
Michelle.
Oh, I'm
Hang
sorry.
on just a second,
I'm sorry.
Teresa.
I'm sorry.
Michelle, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just was hoping that it would be a little bit more clear cut because, obviously a word even, can change a lot. I didn't realize that it wasn't, kind of like what we've been doing and we just kind of add a little twist or we say, this isn't a requirement. Do we want to adopt it? So I didn't have a chance to really look at what we're looking to change. So that's all. Sorry about that.
If you would like me to pull up the former policy, I could. But as I said, that this one is much more substantial in explaining the details and significance of the disciplinary procedures, the expulsion process. It doesn't fundamentally change when we expel students, but I think the intent behind it is to be much more detailed and descriptive.
Teresa, did you want to ask a question?
So these are CABE, this is a CABE policy. This is not a state requirement. This is redone by CABE.
So this is a CABE policy, but this policy is a legally required policy. So you have to have an expulsion on this topic here. So this is a model that's been written by CABE that coincides with the law and requirement. There are other agencies like Shipman and Goodwin that write their version of a policy, but this is one that the Board of Ed must have. It's not a choice policy.
When you say we must have, according to who?
Connecticut
This-
state law.
Okay.
Michelle?
Just one more question. I know we've had some expulsions and, while we're talking amongst board members, we've, spoke about different things that we might want to implement to just, as far as policy. Is this where we would implement that, or would that be later? Like we have, we've talked about where, I think we've
So-
spoken past
I'll
about.
jump in if you don't mind, Kelly.
thanks.
I think when we talk about sort of the specifics of how these policies are carried out, that's under the jurisdiction of the administration. Our role here in setting the policy is to make sure that whatever guiding principles that we're applying align with what the state requirements are. And that's typically why we follow the CABE policies here. But if we're digging into like some of the specifics of, individual circumstances, or if we're digging into, the specifics of how the administration executes the principles of the policy, that doesn't really fall under the authority of the policy committee or the board.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
Mhm. Any other questions from committee members? Any questions from other folks on the call here? All right, seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to bring policy 5114 to the board for a first read, please. Can someone please make a motion that we recommend policy revised 5114 for a first read to the full Board of Education, please?
I make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Terry. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion so carries. Thank you. All right, Kelly, did you want to move down to 511421, extracurricular academic eligibility? And there's a note here about a revision discussion. So if you could elaborate.
Yeah, so I'm going to pull up the existing policy right now for this one. This is not a mandatory policy, so this is one that we can elect to have. Let me just apologize. I have to zoom in each time. Please remind me if there's difficulty reading. So this is one that we have. Let me try that again. My apologies. Thank you. Sorry, thank you very much. This policy is our extracurricular policy, and it's particularly around academic eligibility. meaning that students who participate in extracurriculars, so after school, sports, clubs, athletics, different activities, that as a district, we expect them to have a certain level of academic preparation or success. So really speaks to failures in courses, so on and so forth, would not meet the criteria for extra curricular eligibility. There is a more detailed policy that is related to our CIAC rules that we will review actually in our next policy meeting, which is specific to eligibility for sports. So I do just want to alert you that a more detailed policy on that is forthcoming. But this is meant for any other club or other extracurricular activities. The question here for the policy committee is if we want to put any reference in this policy to discipline related to eligibility for extracurricular activities. So that is one thing that we could infuse in the policy as well. The second, and that was a recommendation from the CABE policy audit for consideration. The other is just to bring to everyone's attention that this is not a required policy. So for example, for those of you that have participated in expulsions, for instance, that prohibits students from participating in extracurricular activities, right? When there's an expulsion in place, they lose the eligibility or access to that. Similarly, if you are suspended out of school on a particular day, you do not participate in the extracurricular on that day. So that is already embedded in some of our disciplinary codes and policies. So kind of two questions on the table. Do we feel the need to continue this policy to explicitly state that we expect students to demonstrate a certain level of academic expectation to partake in extracurriculars? Do we want to include a disciplinary recommendation or disciplinary clause? If we want to, it can be included in this policy. Or do we feel the need to have this extra policy because it's already embedded or covered in our other policies? So I will turn it over to everyone for discussion.
Committee, what are your thoughts?
Kelly,
Michelle?
what are your thoughts?
Did,
Oh, go ahead.
did you say that somebody who is not doing, is not showing progress successfully cannot take this extracurricular activity? Is that what we're saying? Like if
Um,
you're not doing well, is this a summer school program? Is this within the school year? Like, I think I'm
This is
just.
meant for after-school clubs and activities. And there is no specific, the policy is written pretty generically, to be very honest, which leaves some room for interpretation. And it just says suitable level of academic preparation and success. So indicating to our students and families that we expect you to be performing in school, but it does not say you must maintain a C average or better. Like I said, for for CIAC rules for our athletic teams, there are very strict rules around that, which is why it's a completely separate policy.
Okay. Thank you.
Juanita?
Hi. So just in reading the policy, I think it's, you say generic, I say very vague, to show evidence that there is successful progress. Progress is, to me, sometimes individualized and may not be as much for one student as it is for other, but they are successful in their own right. And so I find that where it says show evidence of successful progress in their educational plan, to be a bit vague. And just to note that extracurricular activities for some of our students is what keeps them connected and engaged in the school community. So I just want to put that out there.
I completely agree with you.
Other committee members, any thoughts on this policy? So I do want to just sort of acknowledge that a lot of the content that's covered by the regulations following this policy are now covered by the previous policy that we're making a recommendation to the board for a read on. And so to that extent, I'm not sure how much sense it makes to renew this policy. I do think you know, to the point that was made by Juanita and Kelly both, this is a very sort of vaguely worded policy. And I don't know is that something that is helpful to our administration in terms of handling different disciplinary cases, or does it not really serve any particular function to the work that you're doing?
And certainly Kara or Kim, please feel free to jump in. I think that this, to your point, Kate, I think that there's enough information covered in policy 5114 that we just reviewed, that, you know, if there was a disciplinary action, for example, that it would give the administrator the authority if they felt that that should also extend to extracurriculars. So I don't necessarily think you need a separate policy. And because of the vagueness of this policy, I think it's left up to the individual interpretation, which could be helpful in some situations. But again, I question, do you need a policy that says that?
I agree.
So given this feedback, what is the appetite of the committee here? Do we want to renew this policy? Do we want to remove this policy? What is the preference? Do we want to change this policy?
I'd like to make a motion that we remove this policy.
So I'm just looking for a little clarification in a case like this where we do not want to renew a policy, we want to remove the policy. Is that something that has to come before the full board for a vote? It is. Okay.
Yes.
So
Well, Cape's suggestion is to consider a more comprehensive model.
What?
which I think, you know, when we looked at policy 5114, the one we just approved, that is much more a much more extensive policy than the previous version of it, and it incorporates many elements that are covered by the regulations that follow 5114.21. And that was one of the reasons that I asked Kelly, you know, does this particular policy add anything substantial to that one that we just passed, 5114? Because that governs most of the content around discipline and you know, sort of what tools are at the disposal of the administration in terms of handling you know, a situation with the student's performance.
I kind of think that you have to have some sort of, even keeping the blurb about extracurricular activity, acknowledging that we expect a standard, at least, you know, disciplinary standard, academic standard. Yeah, it says it only refers to academic eligibility. And we're thinking discipline. I think just keep it. And the disciplinary part, like you said, is in the other section.
So are you, sorry,
I was
Kelly,
just
go
going
ahead.
to say, I'm sorry, if I could just provide some context, I do believe that this policy was originally added. If you notice, it's still 5114, but it's 0.21 was originally added due to the original 5114 that was in place before we just made the recommendation for the new one, more comprehensive policy, I think did not cover enough of the latitude across extracurriculars, which is why they added this as an addition. I think with your recommendation to adopt the more comprehensive new suspension, expulsion, and due process policy, I think it covers all the expectations within this one.
So committee members, what is the preference here? Can we take a quick consensus to see who's in favor of renewing this policy and who is in favor of removing this policy, please? Teresa?
I say keep it, renew it.
Michelle? You're muted, Michelle, sorry.
I was thinking to remove it since we've, increased the scope of what the other policy covers. So remove.
Okay. Juanita,
Sorry. Remove.
Al?
Remove.
Okay. Given the feedback here, I am looking now for a motion to remove policy 5114.21 to make a recommendation to the board to remove policy 5114.21.
So moved.
Thank you, Juanita. And Michelle, you'll get the second there. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion so carries. Just one point of clarification. Does this have to go through a second read process similar to what we do with the policies that are being adopted, or is this a simple like single vote at the upcoming meeting? It's a simple vote. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate
What was
that.
that? What was that response?
I just want, it was a yes, it's a single vote. So if we vote as a board to remove it, then it will just be removed and we won't have a second consideration of the policy.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? If you, and I'm not on the committee, but if you're going to remove it and then you're going to bring it before the board, and the board still has the right to ask questions at that meeting, and maybe the majority don't want to remove it.
Yes,
Am I right or wrong?
that's correct.
So whether you bring it up for a first reading, the board has a right to discuss this policy.
Absolutely. It has to be brought to the board for a vote. I just wanted to clarify because when we bring a new policy in, we have to have 2 votes on it. We have to have the first read vote and then the second read vote. So I just wanted to make sure if we take a vote on this kind of the removal of a policy and the board, has its discussion and then votes, yes, they want to remove it. We don't then bring it up at another meeting like we would with adding a
It's
policy.
that, but we
Okay.
we should have a discussion on it because everybody might not feel that they would like this. So, okay.
Yes. Did you have anything that you wanted to comment about on it, Mrs. Cooper?
No, because you already voted, and it wasn't a required policy, but I also was not comfortable, and I have to read it again with removing it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I look forward to certainly discussing this with the full board to get the sense of where folks are with it.
So for me, I'm sorry, just for clarification, am I putting down that this is a simple single vote, or are we looking to put it before the committee, the board of ed?
It will go to the full board for consideration. So the motion we made here out of committee was that the recommendation of the policy committee to the full board is for the removal of policy 5114.21. And at the point that we take, we bring this up for as an action item at the board meeting. That's the point at which it will open up for conversation amongst the full board so that folks can discuss how they feel about it. And if the board so chooses, they may reject the policy committee's recommendation and kick it back to the policy committee for conversation.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mhm. Okay. We are now going to move on to 5117. Please, Kelly. Thank you.
So 5117 is talking about, refer to it as school attendance areas. And basically, this gives the superintendent and the Board of Education the right to designate the schools in which students are zoned right across the district. So for example, which elementary school you're zoned to. And it talks about the criteria for which that determination should be made: student safety, educational needs, programming. So sometimes that's for our MLL programming or special ed programming, optimum use of facilities. So let's say we're running out of room in one school and we need more we have extra room in another school, it gives the authority to make some decisions around that. Residential patterns, as we know, as we've seen building in certain sections of Danbury, we have seen increased enrollment in those schools. And so this would, in theory, give the ability to potentially look at rezoning schools in the future. It also talks about the ages of students. So for example, we have, we recently added a new preschool facility, but we have some elementary schools that are K-5 versus other elementary schools that are K-3 and a 4-5 school. So it allows that authority for those decisions. And lastly, racial and ethnic balancing, which is something that we want to make sure to monitor across schools. You can modify those and make changes. It also speaks here to a provision, and this is in state statute, that students who are placed in foster care, so that's students who are in the care of DCF, the Department of Children and Families, are students who are homeless, are allowed to stay in what is deemed as the school of origin. And essentially what that means is if a student is going to school A and is, let's say, removed from their home by DCF or experiences homelessness and needs to move to another location, they are allowed to remain in the school that they are originally in for consistency. And that can apply whether or not, though, in those two situations, whether or not the student moves in or out of Danbury. Because sometimes we will see, for example, when it involves the Department of Children and Families, that they may find a foster home in a surrounding or neighboring town, and we are still obligated to have that student remain in the school of origin. Usually it's for the remainder of that school year, and then it's reassessed. So that is the essence of this policy, and I'll pause there for any questions.
Committee members, questions? Or comments?
The racial and ethnic balance that was added. Is there a reason for that?
So those are things that we report district-wide. We always report out on our racial and ethnic. Those are required in our state required reports to the Department of Education. And those would be things for consideration if we saw an imbalance between two schools across the district that we should look at for consideration of should there be any changes made.
So the first 5117 is the new one, and the old one is the one in the back, correct? Is that right?
You're looking at a paper version, so I'm not confident. If you're looking at the agenda, the ones on the left-hand
Yeah.
side are the older original policies, and the ones on the right-hand side are the new.
There should be a date at the bottom of one of them, Teresa, that says.
I don't have it. It's not here. Ah,
The original regulation, or the most current version of this, was approved in 2000.
right, February 9th. I see that, but I'm trying to see where I got a paper version, and it's want to make sure what.
Would you like me to pull up the original one on the screen? This is the newer proposed
Sure.
one. Okay, I can do that. Here is the original policy that was adopted in February of 2020, or I'm sorry, 2000. I apologize for that. Some
No,
of the
I don't
wording
have that. No.
slightly different, but you
Yeah.
will see it here.
Okay.
I will also just say to the committee that for the newer version of this, you'll see that there is both the policy and then underneath is a regulation, but the regulation is not labeled at the top, so it is a little bit confusing. But the
And for the
second half,
purpose,
that-
yeah, and
Yeah,
for the
sorry.
purposes of tonight, we're just looking at the policy. I know the regulation is below, but just the policy.
yeah. Michelle?
So I'm sorry, you had mentioned that if there was an equity imbalance, that you would take that into consideration to make adjustments. How do you do that currently now? Do we do that now in the district? And Is that something that you think that we need? Or did I misunderstand what you were saying regarding, being able to move or change the racial, I don't, like, we're adding this policy, why? Other than you're looking for, I get it, for, detailed information, maybe for grants or something, I don't know. But how do you change the way that you, I don't know, choose what students go to what school?
I believe actually these are all state mandated. I mean, this goes back to Chef versus O'Neill and what the makeup is for your schools. So this isn't something that we've created. These are all part of the state mandates that we have. So, if you were to if we were to report our data to the State Department of Education and we had, for example, all Hispanic students in one school to the exclusion of everyone else, they would look at that as imbalancing. It would hit our Title I, I believe. It would hit our ESL numbers. It would hit our special ed numbers. So this is just a generic policy that recognizes that we have certain mandates from the state about the composition of the schools. And it just gives you the latitude to be able to maybe make changes to your districting based on some of that feedback.
So,
And
so
so
if
like
we were to-
we had one situation where we were trying to redistrict a certain area, and it turned out that all of the families were of one ethnicity, which raised issues about the composition of the school. So, but they're not anything that we make up. These are all requirements that we have from state legislation, from the State Department.
Teresa?
Question, do we have a tuition rate for our schools?
Typically, it's considered the per pupil expenditure. If someone were to attend, that would be charged tuition. That happens very infrequently, but that is what they would have to pay to access education in the district.
Do we know what the current figure is?
Don't have
Or-
the exact number, but roughly Kara could give it to you.
I have it in the budget book. It's like 16
16
and
and
change.
change.
Yep.
16,000?
Yeah.
Still,
Okay.
it's been there for a while. So 16, that's like fully in, and then you've got your your multi-language learner, right? What is that looking like? And then your special ed, is that like still 50 and like 76 for those? Like,
So
Good
there's not an exact number. So what I will share with you for special education, for example, I think the magnet school is a good example of this. Students come from other districts, and there is a tuition for the flat fee of just general ed instruction. So for third grade classroom instruction, this is what it costs to educate a student in Danbury, and between the partnering district sending money as well as money coming through to the state, that covers the expense of educating one of our surrounding town students. If that child receives special education services, we bill that based on the services that the child is receiving. So for example, if they are receiving specialized reading instruction with a special ed teacher, there is a rate attached to that depending on the amount of time. If they're also receiving speech and language services or OT or PT services, there is a rate attached to that. So what we're looking, it's an hourly rate that's billed based on the size of the group the student is participating in.
so that, is that different in the sense that that's a state school and not like our other, they don't have the same kind of built-in financial setup, correct? Like,
So would
is
this
there a
apply
difference
to other
between a
schools
child-
other
yeah,
than the
because
magnet?
we don't get any assist, like you're looking at a situation that I can see, but let's say it is just special ed in Danbury, regular.
So I'll give you another
traditional
example.
public school is what I'm
Yep.
looking for.
So a perfect example, a student is living in, let's say, is residing in a Danbury foster family, and because the nexus of origin, let's say, is Hartford, that's a significant distance for a child to go back and forth with. DCF may determine that that child should enroll in Danbury, and we would welcome that student in, but the responsibility falls to Hartford. So we bill back Hartford the cost of educating that student.
Right, but I'm just asking, what is the cost to educate a student in this district, not out of district, not like, just like literally, is that the same cost?
Well, I don't want to, I certainly appreciate the question. I think it's a good
Yeah,
one
I'm
for
just
us to
confused.
resolve, but I just don't think this is the correct meeting to handle that
Okay.
question. If we could just hold it and revisit it.
Yes.
Okay.
thank-
All right. Are there any other questions from committee members or comments from committee members about this policy?
Kate, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead,
So
Juanita.
when we talk about school attendance areas, and you can also, maybe this is for another discussion also, where would administrative placement fall? And do we have a policy on administrative placement?
I want to make sure I'm understanding the question is, are you referring to administrative placement at like a program like a Reach or Endeavor program?
I am. Do we have a
Okay.
policy on that?
There is a reference in one of our regulations on that, but I'm not aware of it in an existing policy, but I would need to confirm that, Juanita. This policy in particular is not meant to speak to administrative placements.
Okay, thank you.
Are there questions or comments from non-committee members that are on the call here?
No.
If I could just add, Kate, there is an optional provision that we didn't speak to. It's right under, and I can share my screen again so we can all see what I'm referring to. It's part of the policy that is optional, and it really talks about if the option to attend another school if you don't want to go to your zone school. We would not recommend to add this into the current policy.
Any feedback on that from the committee here? Okay. Given that there is no feedback, actually, any feedback from not, go ahead, Michelle.
So let's just, this is to, if you want to put somebody outside of the district, right? Controlled free zoning, choice. What are we saying? Is this an optional policy, and are we looking to get rid of it or to? add it?
It's an optional, so this is the new CABE version of this policy that they're recommending that we adopt. And that optional provision is up to the purview of the policy committee and the board
Roll
to
back
adopt
down.
or not adopt.
Can we just roll back down to that again? 1 second. Okay, so you actually would have a choice, through the attendance area first.
This is basically allowing parents, so if I'm zoned to go to school A and I don't want to go there, I can fill out an application process to be considered for school B or C. And then it's up to the district based on, enrollment, availability, so on and so forth. This is something that we are trying to get out of. It does create a transportation conundrum. And I think it creates a perception that certain schools have more credibility or weight than others. And so we are encouraging all students to go to the school in which they're zoned for.
So let's just say,
I'm sorry to, Michelle,
sorry.
that had her hand up. I'd just like to recognize her first, please. I'll come back to you.
Is that for me,
Juanita?
Kate?
Mhm.
Okay, so Kelly, I think just for clarification, we are talking within the Danbury Public School District. Is that
Yes.
correct?
That is correct.
So we're not talking about going out of district. It's just within our school district. If I ask, can I please go to King Street
Mhm.
instead of South Street?
That is
And
correct.
make an application for that. Okay, thank you.
Michelle?
so let's just say I'm in the district and, Pembroke is not zoned in my area and they, have a lot of special ed services. And I want my child to go there or whatever, for whatever reason. Do we currently, I didn't think that we currently allowed that. Is that an option? And that you're saying we've been trying to dissuade people?
So
From choice, in other words, to me, that's what I'm looking at, is that choice.
So as a, I think two parts, I'll give two answers. As a special education program, we have certain programs like our self-contained programming at Pembroke. We have some at Great Plain. We have other programming at King Street and another one at Hayes Town. If a student needs that different level of programming due to their special education needs through the PPT process, a student can be placed in the program that best meets those needs. That is considered a district-wide program that is available and accessible to any student. So that's not what this is referring to. This is referring to a parent that says, I'd rather go to school A than school B. Within the Danbury Public Schools within our district. Certainly, and Kara, please jump in if you'd like to add anything. There are sometimes, particular situations in which, they're on a case-by-case scenario that it may be in a child's best interest to approve something. For example, a student is moving and wants to start in the school that they're moving to a month later or something like that, that we want to be reasonable. But to create a system in which parents can essentially apply for access to different schools is not something that we want to do.
And you're saying that is something that we currently do and you're dissuading from it, or you're saying we don't do that now and we're trying to
We-
dissuade?
We can do it if we need to. It would be an administrative decision. However, given the capacity issues that we have across all of our schools, you really have to make a very wise choice as to the reason why you would do it. The risk would have to outweigh the benefit would have to outweigh the risk. And in all of these situations, it creates a transportation conundrum crisscrossing across town. So we don't have a lot of room in our schools. So whenever you make a decision to make a move, it has an equal and opposite reaction in another school. So either you're going to have an overcrowding situation, or there's a transportation issue. Occasionally, one of our schools may fill up and there's no more capacity, and we are forced to make an administrative decision to divert to a sister school or a school with room that's within the closest transportation area. So it varies, and we do take a look at requests, but we've been honoring less and less of them, just because we don't have the capacity to get into the business of I want to go to the school and that school unless there's a very serious reason.
So Teresa?
I was glad Juanita asked about, it was the Danbury district. It was a little confusing, what they were referring to. Can we somehow be more specific in the wording there if we do accept it? Say within the Danbury district, blah, 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 first choice of school in the area, blah, blah, blah. I would prefer a little bit more clarification, because if it wasn't for Juanita, I thought this was meant if you wanted to go, out of district type of thing, or I'm just not with it tonight.
We certainly
okay.
can add that. I also want to add that the board only has the provision to set policies for the operation of the Danbury Public Schools district. So any of the policies in here, you would not be able to decide that a student could go to a surrounding area school or district, and any out of district implication when it comes to like a special education student is defined by the planning and placement team process. So, I mean, we can certainly put that in here, but all these policies are only for Danbury Public Schools.
Okay, it was just me then.
Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with Teresa. I don't think it's clear. I, feel like there's certain circumstances, and I was not even aware that it was even a possibility. And you're saying that the district is trying to do it less and less. Like how many students do we actually entertain, or do we provide this or actually take this up? And I understand completely if we don't have the room that this wouldn't be the case. But, again, if for some reason there's a situation in a school, like I've had parents come to me and say, my son was absolutely fine, or the environment doesn't work. And they're like, either I have to move out of Danbury to find another, classroom, or I've got to pay $18,000 or whatever the case is. But it's come into, so I'm just wondering, depending on, my experience too, and sometimes certain environment may not work. I would not want to take the choice or the possibility of a choice if we have the right circumstances to, properly, work with the child and try to find the best environment. So I would be very apprehensive to say no and give that opportunity to a student,
I don't,
you know.
can I just ask a point of clarification of the administration? Um, we do have communication from parents that make these kind of requests periodically. So we're not doing away with those conversations or those possibilities. We're just not in this conversation we're having right now. We're just evaluating whether or not we want to have an optional provision that specifies this. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So in other words, Michelle, those conversations can still take place. Parents can still approach administration with requests depending on the specific circumstances that they might find themselves in with the student. I think to Dr. Casimiro's point and to Kelly's points, there are, reactions that happened, repercussions that happened as a result of making decisions about placement that also have to be considered. It can't be done exclusively at the behest of what a parent, feels about the situation, but our administration is certainly open to having those conversations should parents wish to have them.
Absolutely, Kate. Just to kind of punctuate that, and we have always had an open door with listening and certainly entertaining. But again, it's there. We do have a review process. We do have discussion about it, and a lot of times, just Michelle, we do end up having some pretty good conversations with the parents as a result of like, hey, what's going on, and what is there a communication breakdown at the school? Where services, did we engage in doing right by the correct services for your child? Let's try something different. So we always those conversations and those requests usually end up in a review process where there's engagement of the parent and potential services if those have not been employed to date. So, we do very good work on that. There's a lot of due diligence in that process, and I would stand by the process that we've been using.
I do also want to just ask another quick question. Point number 2 under that optional provision specifies that parents of students choosing out of area attendance shall provide student transportation. If we have a case where a student, you get a student request and there's a conversation and ultimately the decision comes down that the student is going to attend, a different school. In that kind of circumstance right now, is the school district responsible for the transportation of that student?
If we make the administrative decision to place a child there,
Mhm.
or if a section is closed, let's say grade 2 at Ellsworth is closed and we need to bus somewhere else, then the transportation, we take care of the transportation.
Okay, so adding this provision would actually create additional burden for the families potentially by requiring them to provide the transportation.
Well, they have to do that now. If we do grant a request and they're going across town for whatever reason, it's on the parent, and they go into that knowing that that's the situation. If we make the determination, based on having to close down due to enrollment, then we make the effort to redo the bus routes and try to get that student there, because that's
Or if it was
through
like
no
a,
fault of their own. They're tried to register in their attendance zone, but that there was a barrier.
okay.
Or
And
if
that would apply also in case of special education programs or,
if it's a program that we're recommending, special education, multilingual learner services that they need in a particular school, then we are obligated to provide transportation currently.
okay, thank you for the clarification.
And
Teresa?
one more. Okay, academy model. What happens if a student is near the one school academy model but it wants to be in the other school? Is there an issue there?
Danbury High School will be one high school. So it's one campus split into two. It's one high school. So Students can, if they want to switch their academy pathway, this is really not an attendance zone or transportation zone. We have only one high school in the city of Danbury.
So it
So
doesn't matter.
all buses lead to Danbury High School one way or another, depending on the campus. So it's really about whether or not if a student changes their pathway, that's a whole nother issue not related to
Okay.
attendance zones. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good question though.
Any other questions or comments? Committee members? Non-committee members?
No.
All right, given this conversation, I'm looking for a motion to make a recommendation of policy 5117, school attendance areas, without the optional provision included. Is there a motion?
I make the motion.
Thank you, Al. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Juanita. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
I'm kind of
Any-
iffy on that.
You want to abstain?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, I think I'm there as well then. Actually, can we get more information? I just feel like I don't have all the information. I'm gonna abstain as
what-
well.
What information are you looking for? I just want to make
Like
sure.
how many students, how many requests do we have? How many, like we might entertain them? Do we actually place them? Like, I know that we don't want to kind of go into the weeds, but it just seems like, having been a parent with a child in special needs and having to find the right, like jumping around. I want to make sure that the parent has a choice or at least the opportunity, the conversation. And I didn't even know that we actually entertained it. So I don't know if it's repetitive to have this, like to have this little additional provisional policy here, even just to strike up a conversation, because again, I was not aware and I don't know what kind of requests we've gotten and how many do we actually, if we had the opportunity, the space to accommodate anybody.
I can certainly do a review of the number of requests we've received this year and how many have been granted. I can say to you anecdotally, very few. But I will clarify with the exact numbers there.
Thank you.
Kelly.
So I guess I would ask committee members if we did take a vote on this and the vote did go through, but in consideration for the questions that some of our committee members have, I wonder if we could bring that information to the full board when we do this for a first read. This could be part of the conversation that we have.
Thank you.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, thank
Agreed.
you.
Is that okay, Kelly?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
All right. So we are at,
So it passed?
it did pass, yes.
Okay.
We had 2 abstentions, but 3 votes in favor. All right, so we are moving on to policy 5118, non-residence attendant. Non-resident attendance.
So I'd like to propose that we look at version 1 of this policy. Again, another CABE recommended policy that we need to consider this evening. And this really talks about children that are not living within the district, so non-residents, meaning not living within Danbury, and talks about the terms and conditions under which a district may decide to enroll them. Again, this decision is up to the district and is based on availability. Can we provide programming for these students? Do we have the room and availability? And really on a case-by-case situation. I will say again, anecdotally, this happens very infrequently, but it is important that you have a policy around this.
Do we have any currently now?
Yes, there is an initial policy.
No, I mean, students like this
Out of district.
out of district?
Um, you do have a handful of students that I can speak to that are typically with the Department of Children and Families, which is an obligation despite this policy, that are non-resident students. We also will occasionally take a student for tuition into our vocational programming at the high school level. So that's our 18 to 22-year-old program. Some of your surrounding districts, and this is all based on enrollment and availability. We have 2 programs currently. One is a job shadowing program, a vocational program for work with support. And the other one is our partnership with WestCon, our Western Connection program. We give priority and seats in those programs to Danbury Public School students first, but some of your surrounding districts will send a student there for tuition, and that is reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Kelly.
This also there has been, I'm not aware of any currently, but Kara, please correct me if there is a situation that you're aware of, but this could also be the staff member that wants their student to go to school in Danbury, for example, that they could make a request. They do not live in the town, and they would be obligated to pay, we would be obligated to see if we can in fact meet their needs in district. And then that would be for tuition or a fee for enrollment.
Teresa?
So we're looking at version 1.
That's
This is
correct.
what you recommend.
Mhm.
Well,
What's the difference?
that's fine.
Kelly, in our prior policy, it talked a little bit about if students, something about a semester, let me just go back and students who become non-residents during a school semester may be permitted to continue attending the Danbury Public Schools for the remainder of that semester without payment of tuition.
That is correct. I just pulled up the old policy, which is from 2000, and this is the paragraph you're referring to.
Correct. If they choose to stay,
Mhm.
they are asked to pay tuition.
Kara, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I think it really depends on the time of the year, right? So if there's a student who has moved and it's April, that we're less likely to try to pursue that by the time you even get something in place and try to, the school year is just about over. If you're just talking about a September situation, that's another conversation that we would have about having the parent agree to if they wanted to agree to remain to pay on a tuition basis. That again assumes that we have the room, assumes that it's advantageous to the school system. That's kind of another delineation. Is there undue risk or harm, or is there an advantageous situation for the district where like, okay, well, this is a class that's under enrolled and this actually helps. We haven't had that case in a long time in Danbury. Most of the time we're over enrolled. But it's really, we try to be humanistic in this approach here. We aren't looking to upset a child's life and disturb them to the greatest extent possible. But we're also realistic that it does cost us money to educate children here. So we have to make a judgment call on that.
Teresa?
Can I speak to the mother that was at the last board meeting from Bethel?
I don't think we can speak about specific circumstances.
Okay,
but
all right.
Kate, if it's okay, I just want, both Kara and I did follow up, and that matter has been resolved. I will just share that.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just being that we're in this frame of mind here. Just God bless you. God bless you both.
And again, we shouldn't be talking about individual students, but I think that's the
Yeah.
essence of the question. It has
It's
been remedied.
It's a good outcome. It's a good outcome.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments about this policy? From any non-committee members? Okay. So I am looking for a recommendation for first read to the full board. Policy 5118, non-resident attendance, version number 1.
I make that motion.
Al,
Thank
where are
you.
you?
Iraq.
Moved by Al. Is there a second?
Second it.
Thank you, Teresa. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I,
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion so carries. Okay. Thank
One
you for
more.
your patience. We're on the last one here, and that is policy 5118.1, homeless students.
Okay, our last policy, again, another required policy, 5118.1. And this speaks to our homeless students. A lot of the times you will hear them referred to as McKinney-Vento, and that is one of the terminologies used to identify. There is also grant monies that we typically apply for and have been the recipients of in years past. And so this really speaks to the students that, for whatever reason, experience homelessness. And it really advocates that we continue their enrollment in school and eliminate any barriers that might be challenging for them to immediately enroll in school. So one of the things through the enrollment or registration process, I'll give you for example, sometimes there will be a tragedy or there might be a fire in a home or something like that where important documents and paperwork did not follow with the family or child. And this recognizes that in those unique and special circumstances and basically encourages the district to do everything within its power to immediately enroll that child in school, to get them back in school or to continue them in school if they were already with us. And not have additional barriers that are there. Sometimes I do get asked a question regarding medical and physicals, and we always involve our coordinator of health services to make sure that there's not any risk to other children. For example, while we're trying to track down medical records or catch up on vaccinations, things like that nature. But this policy is something that is currently in practice. I think this one in particular is a little bit more specific on the details and bringing it up to date. And I would recommend the optional language stay in the revision of this policy. I don't know if there's any questions.
Committee members?
so Kelly, when you say, if you can scroll up a little bit more, the optional language will replace where it's up above, the board shall make. Are we replacing that entire first paragraph under homeless students?
I was recommending that we keep that first paragraph and just add under optional, you would remove the heading optional language and just write the district administration shall attempt to remove existing barriers and keep that section below it. But I would keep the first paragraph as well.
And so I would love to see up in that first paragraph, the board shall make reasonable efforts, encourage their enrollment, and attempt to eliminate existing barriers as you did down in the optional language.
So
No?
So kind of take that first sentence under optional language and bring it up into that first paragraph.
I'd like to hear what people think. Instead of saying and eliminate, we can attempt to eliminate.
So just modifying the language in the top paragraph to mimic the language of that sentence
Correct.
that appears
Correct.
below.
Whichever way, whatever works out best, but including that somehow.
So Kelly, instead of just saying at the top, in that top paragraph, and eliminate existing barriers, say attempt to eliminate existing barriers.
I think that makes sense.
Committee, does that seem okay to you all?
Yes.
The consistency in the language is good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Juanita. Any other feedback from committee members or questions? Non-committee members, any thoughts on this?
Now, I just want to ask Kelly, as I was reading the policy, when we have homeless students, are there, I don't mean a list of parents or a list of families, or how do we go about placing those homeless students somewhere to live? Do we
That's
have like 5 families or so, you know what I'm trying to, say, somewhere for them to go if they come into they're homeless. Mary Joan, you know that she's going to take in this homeless student.
So we have an identified Vento liaison. Sorry, I'm combining those two words. And that is Lisa Basher is the current liaison. Prior to her, it was Carol. And so it is a school social worker. That list is highly confidential. In fact, it's very protected information. But I can share with you again anecdotally that we have over 100 students currently identified on that list across the district, and that number is up very significantly since it's really since post-COVID. I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think there's definitely some more challenges in the local community that families are experiencing. I also do think, though, that we have increased our outreach. We've designated more of our social work time and support to reach out and liaison with those families. So part-time, so half of her role each week is to work with the different schools. And so she spends time at central registration. She's training our registration staff in how to ask sensitive and tactful questions when kind of flags come up for certain families, and to filter that information to her so she can have a more one-on-one information. As I had shared, there is grant money available. In that grant money, it is something we need to apply for, so it's not something that we automatically get, but it is something annually that we are filling out. I'm actually in the process of completing one for next school year. It's not a significant amount of money. It's $50,000 for next year. And with that, we put money in there to help students to access programming. So sometimes these families need assistance with accessing after school programming or summer programming. We also put money in there for school supplies, clothing supplies, shoes, things like that students need. Lisa also it takes in donations from sometimes students, families, staff members to get different products. Hygiene products, for example, are something that oftentimes students will reach out to her for. She's also working to connect them with different food resources, food banks and so forth, helping parents to connect with different community resources, maybe for job interview skills to help them. She works with the Housing Authority in Danbury quite regularly. So all of those different things that families may need, very similar to our work that we're doing around the LEAP programming, right? What's the why? What's the challenge? What's the barrier? And how can we support you? So she's amazing. She's done an excellent job in doing that. And then it's often partnering with other districts, because we also know that many of our homeless families tend to be families that are experiencing housing instability and challenges, and will frequently, sometimes they're within district and they experience those challenges, but other times we are seeing these families that are coming and going kind of across different towns and districts. And so it also is an outreach to those towns and really understanding the history and the background and getting students in. At the high school level, it's even what is known as unaccompanied youth. So there are sometimes students that are 18 years old that do not have the support of a parent or guardian, as far as living directly with them. They might be living with a friend. They might be kind of rotating to different friends and, sleeping on a couch or things of that nature. And it's helping that young individual to access resources, in the local community and to advance their education beyond high school. So it's multifaceted, but that there are a lot of different situations in which someone could be deemed as experiencing homelessness.
Thank you very much.
Teresa?
What is the maximum age that this applies to?
This is anyone that's enrolled in the public school district right now. So under McKinney-Vento for schools, that could be anyone from age 3 that is enrolled in our preschool program all the way up until age 22 that would be enrolled in high school.
Thank you.
I should share, though, that sometimes we identify a family that has a school-age child that also has younger siblings or older siblings. So sometimes once a family is identified, we're working with the entire family unit. So it's not
Okay.
uncommon that you might have a middle school child that's identified, but they have a 2-year-old sibling. And so when we work with the family, we're working with the entire family.
Wow, that's really nice.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments about this policy? Okay, I'm looking for a motion then to recommend to the board for a full first read, policy 5118.1, homeless students. Is there a motion on the floor, please?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Michelle. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you, everyone. I know that some of our members are trying to get to services this evening, and so I just want to call for a motion to adjourn, please.
Wait, 1 minute, one question.
Teresa?
Callie, how come we don't have a section 7,000?
So that we are not required to have any policies in the 7,000 section. Those are optional policies and they relate to new construction.
Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
Kate. I
No
motion
problem.
to adjourn.
Thank you, Teresa. Is there a second on the floor, please?
Second.
Second. Oh.
Thank you, Al. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right.